All right, thank you. Thank you, Holly and the Cape Tap team. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar presentation in which we will discuss the state budget update and provide an allocation amendment overview. Next slide, please. As Holly mentioned, my name is Mayra Diaz. I'm the program lead with the Chancellor's Office, and I have co-presenting with me today Neil Kelly from California Department of Education and Mandalee Gonzalez, who's representing the Cape Tap and will be walking us through the live NOVA demo. Next slide, please. All right, so for today, we are going to focus on going over the governor signed budget amounts, the final amounts for 23-24, covering the guidance memo, state allocation process, and walk through the allocation certification process in NOVA. As Holly had mentioned, we will open it up for questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll also be monitoring the chat for questions. Next slide, please. All right, so to kick us off, the CAPE allocations for 23-24 have been officially released, and the CAPE-based funding for 22-23, as you see on this chart, was established at $597 million. In January, the governor's proposed budget included a $645 million proposed increase with an 8.13 COLA percentage increase. After the May revise, the governor's signed budget was finalized at $646 million with a slightly higher COLA increase at 8.22%. The COLA increase between the May revise and the signed final budget was a 0.09% increase, or a $538,000 total increase. In summary, the new CAPE baseline funding has now increased by $49 million. Next slide, please. In this next slide, the table displays the legislature's commitment to the continued investment in the California Adult Education Program and for our adult learners across the state. You can see the continued funding increases in the most recent years. For 23-24, we have a historic $646 million in total apportionment funding. Next slide, please. As the final governor's budget was signed during the last week of June, the Cape State Leadership Office released the annual Cape allocations memo for the field. Next slide, please. In this next slide, I will cover a little bit more details about the memo. The Cape Final Consortium Allocations memo for 23-24 was released on July 12th. The memo can be accessed on the CAPE website, and it has also been emailed and posted on the CAPE weekly newsletter. And that was on the July 12th edition as well. The memo contains a link to the final 23-24 consortia allocation amounts, which are broken down by consortia, fiscal agent, direct funded member apportionment totals as well. There is also NOVA instructions included for consortia to complete the next steps to this allocation process. However, we will also be covering those steps in greater detail throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to go over the Cape State allocation process to provide you with an overview. There are two important items that I would like to point out. First off, Education Code mandates that the Chancellor's Office and the California Department of Education provide allocation schedules to the Department of Finance no later than July 15th annually. Looks like we met that deadline this year, which means that by law, the state must disperse CAPE funds within 45 days of the budget enactment. The disbursement then comes in 11 installments through June of the program year. So this is the state allocation process, in which I will break down a little bit further in the next slide. Next slide, please. So continuing the conversation on the Cape State allocation overview process, what this means is that allocation amounts for fiscal agents and direct funded members must be confirmed shortly after the state budget is passed on July 1st. Our state offices spend the months of May and June busy at work developing the final allocations based on the certified CFAD and release of the May revise. In the event that CAPE receives an adjustment via the May revise and or the trailer bill, CAPE consortia and direct funded members will then be asked to complete an allocation amendment by September 1st. Since the fiscal year 23-24 signed budget came with the 0.09% added COLA increase, which is the $538,000, CAPE consortia and direct funded members are then asked to complete an allocation amendment by September 1st, and that will be included in the live walkthrough that we will be conducting today. Next slide, please. As a reminder, the state has updated NOVA to reflect the amended amount by consortium. So those amounts are already reflected in NOVA if you were to log in and look up your consortia. Each consortium must enter and certify in NOVA the amounts for their member agencies by September 1st. For direct funded members, amounts have already been determined, and you can access the schedule breakdown that is attached to the memo, and as I mentioned previously, also located on the CAPE website. For this step, this is a step that must also be entered manually into NOVA, and as I mentioned, Mandalee will walk us through what those steps entail in the live NOVA demo. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a breakdown of the CAPE allocation process. As you can see, there is a number of steps from beginning at the state level in early January, February, all the way down to September, and I'll go through those steps individually. So for step number 1, the state CAPE office releases the preliminary allocation schedule by February 28th of each year. In step number 2, the consortia will then begin to hold their public meetings shortly after to be able to meet the CFAD certification deadline of May 2nd. It is important that consortia complete the CFAD certification on time, as the state uses this information to begin the development of the allocation schedule. In step number 3, the state monitors for the release of the May revise and any trailer bills. And in step number 4, the state will finalize an allocation schedule to ensure it meets the Department of Finance deadline by July 15, which is the allocation schedule that was published in the memo on July 12th. The state, in step number 5, the state begins the CAPE fund disbursement process. And finally, with step number 6, the consortium members must certify the allocation amendments in NOVA by September 1st in order to meet the deadline. And I am going to hand it over to Neil. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks, Myra. So I'm going to go over a couple of questions related to some of the things that Myra had in the slides, and dive a little deeper into the amounts and how we process these things and why we process this money the way we do it. So first question here is, how does the state CAPE office confirm allocation amounts at the local district level while meeting the July 15th deadline imposed by Department of Finance if we don't need to certify our allocation amendment until September 1st? And the response, next slide, please. If there are any technical adjustments, like Myra said, via the May revise or the trailer bill towards the middle to late June to the state budget bill, the state will use the same funding formula to allocate funds to each consortium. This action will satisfy the need to have allocation amounts for consortia with fiscal agents. But, next slide, for direct funded members, the state will use the same proportional share that was approved via the CFAD on May 2nd to adjust the budget upward or downward. And I'm going to provide an example in the next few slides. So in this example, the CFAD, let's see, the total allocated in the governor's budget, proposed budget, was $1 million to this consortium. And the way it was broken down was member A got 100,000, member B 100,000, member C 100,000, member D 700,000. So you get a percentage share, as you can see on the far right column, equaling 100%. Okay, so then there comes a May, I think it's a May revise. Next slide, please. So we get another increase in the May revise, kind of like we had this year. And so member A got 20%. It was a $200,000 increase. So what we do is we look at that percentage share from the first slide, the allocations, and we make sure that everyone gets that proportionate share because of Ed Code 84914 says nobody gets less than the prior year, nobody gets less than what they've received, whether it's a greater amount or a lesser amount, they get that proportionate share. So that is why you'll see, the first three members getting the 10% and the last member getting the 70%, which is based on the percentage from the original allocation that you saw in the first slide. And so here's how we broke down the 200,000. And then the next slide, please. We put it back all together, and here's their final allocation using that percentage share. So it's the 1 million from the original allocation plus the 200,000 from the May revise gets to 1.2 million, and you can see how that's broken out. And the reason we do this is because we don't want people manipulating the COLA. We don't want people using the COLA as a vote to see who gets it or not. The only way you can deny somebody their full allocation is if it meets the 3 criteria from Ed Code 84913, and that is, if the member doesn't wish to follow the plan, can't follow the plan, or is deemed ineffective, which recently we defined as carryover. And those are the only 3 ways that you can reduce a member's funding or change that funding. So everybody gets that COLA. There's no voting on the COLA. And so this is how that example shakes out. So let's go to the next slide there. Here's another question. If I'm direct funded or a direct funded member, why is the CAPE office calculating this for me? My consortium wants to do other things with the increase. Response, kind of what I was talking about. Members receive no less than the prior year, unless it meets one of the 3 causes for funding reduction, which I just went over, and that's Ed Code 84914. And when we talk about COLA, it's a cost of living increase for all member districts, which means all members in good standing will receive a COLA, which means they didn't meet one of the 3 causes for a funding reduction. Fiscal agents and direct funded members, allocation schedules, as you know, as Myra went over, are due to Department of Finance by July 15th. So we have to have those schedules prepared and sent to state controllers so you can get your money by statute, which is the CAPE funds must be dispersed 45 days after the state budget is signed. So to meet that requirement, we have to provide these allocation schedules to state controllers, and they send that money to your county office, and then the county office sends it to the district in most cases. And that's how you get your funding in those 11 installments. So for fiscal agents, that's pretty easy because it's just a lump sum, and then you guys figure that out in NOVA, how much everybody gets. But you still have to adhere to the COLA means everyone gets it that's in good standing. Member receives no less than the prior year unless there's cause. The reason we calculate the direct funded is because we can't wait till September 1st. We have to have those schedules ready, and over to Department of Finance. So that's why I use that example of the percentages and the share. And that's the easiest way. And the fiscal agent should be doing that as well for their members. But we do it for you for direct funded because we need that information as soon as, before July 15th. So next slide, please. If I'm a direct funded agency, where do I find my predetermined amounts for the allocation amendment? Response, direct funded members can find the link to the predetermined amounts in the CAPE allocation memo released July 12th, 2023. And so that's one of the attachments there. Please note, if a consortium wishes to make changes with their 23-24 allocation, they may do so via the allocation amendment So you can't, make those changes via the CFAD. You can only reduce a member's funding with cause. But if after the fact, if everything's certified, like Myra was talking about, by September 1, and then you agree that you're going to put money towards this project that a member is going to coordinate, then you can move money around via an allocation amendment. But what you can't do is affect the base unless there's cause. So going back to those earlier slides, that everybody gets no less than the prior year unless there's cause. But after all that is settled and certified, you can move money around via the allocation amendment process after the fact, and that won't affect your base or violate the ed code. One thing to keep in mind, if you're direct funded, just because you do an allocation amendment in NOVA, that doesn't mean that we're going to move that money. So let's say after the fact, you decide to give money to another member who's going to do marketing for the consortium, and it's $100,000. Well, if you put it in NOVA and everybody agrees, we're not going to move that $100,000 over to that member. You have to physically transfer the money or write a check and walk it over to that district's accounting office. So it's a little extra steps with the direct funded members and consortia when you're moving money around. Just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. And then finally, reminders before we get into the live demo. AB 1491 carryover tracking has begun at the start of 23-24. And so when you're certifying that Q4, we'll start tracking, clock starts ticking 23-24. Even though you're accumulating expenses now, when you certify that Q1 for 23-24, then we'll start tracking that carryover. Also, 1491 authorized consortia to reduce a member's excessive carryover funding after 2 years of consecutive excessive carryover has been determined. So maybe about half of you have opted in to define what excessive carryover is. For the most part, you're using 20%. And so this is something you should be tracking in NOVA to see how your members are doing, providing technical assistance or connecting them with professional development to help them to stay under that excessive carryover amount. The third bullet, member carryover impacts consortia carryovers. As you know, consortia exceeding 20% annually will be monitored by the Chancellor's Office and CDE. That's at the consortia level. And the NOVA enhancements will be released at the end of this month, and a state webinar will be announced to go through those NOVA enhancements. And these are related to AB 1491, like tools and reports and things that will help you track and monitor the carryover as it unfolds throughout the year. And then lastly, just remember CAPE annual plans are due August 15th of this year. I heard from some people in the field saying the improvements went really well. It's easy to update the annual plan, very simple. Didn't take them that long. So hopefully you have the same experience. And with that, we'll turn it over to, is Mandalee, are you going to do the live demo?
Yes, I am. So let me go ahead and stop sharing screen and I already have. Okay, great. And before we move into the live demonstration, I didn't see any questions in the chat, but before we jump over to that next spot, if there's any questions, now would be a good time. Otherwise, I will invite questions as I go through the walkthrough in NOVA. You can either pop it in the chat. Holly is on with me. I think most of you already know her, but she's also able to answer any questions, as well as just coming off of mute, understanding that as we go through a live demonstration, sometimes it's best just to stop me right where I'm at.
Yes, and if questions do come in, Mandalee, and I'm not able to answer, I will go ahead and interrupt for the members or for the attendees. If you could just put your questions in the chat, that would be great. And no questions had come through.
Okay, and And then is there any questions? Not seeing any. I thought I saw Kelly's hand, but I think she was just, okay. All right, and I'm hopefully sharing screen now. Are you seeing the sandbox?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so everyone, as you would log into Nova, I am in a safe environment. I am in the sandbox. Because I'm in the sandbox, there's a note here that says the database will reset after July 31st. So I bring this to everyone's attention for two reasons. One, anything I do here isn't going to mess up somebody's actual live account. Two, because it doesn't update until July 31st, we're not going to see those allocations that Myra and Neil were talking about live here. So we're going to have a little bit of an imagination. We're still going to walk through the steps. Holly has already dropped in the chat this PowerPoint presentation, which on the latter half also has the step-by-step instructions with the screenshots just to support that allocation. If there's any questions as you're doing them, always reach out to us. We can, we're happy to help. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and begin. When you log in under the consortia and members, some of you have it bookmarked. It'll automatically open up to your consortia. I've opened it up already just because of the lag time when sharing screen. It's just easier to be here. So we're going to use Alan Hancock. Thank you, Alan Hancock. You're letter A and number 1, so you're always at the top. So we use you often. So I'm going to scroll down, and I don't want to go too fast, but I do want to stop at the CFAD. And I do this because oftentimes as people start their allocation process, they'll start to see these red numbers. If you logged into your live site, you would see a red number here with that determined dollar amount of the allocation. As Neil said, in your CFAD, once it's been approved, you cannot make any changes here. This is why we do the allocation amendment. As you notice in years past, you will continue to see these red numbers. They will always stay there. There's nothing you can do, and there's nothing wrong. It is okay. So I know sometimes it kind of throws people. I think it's the red, but it's okay. So going back to our main site, scrolling down under the CFAD, you're going to go right into your allocations. Here you can have, you'll start your amendment, and we'll go ahead and start. It's going to have a pop-up. It's going to let you know that you're going to follow a workflow. It's 3 really easy steps. And then once it's submitted, the changes will need to be approved by the member representatives. Okay, so it's just a reminder that your members will get a notification from Nova. Okay. Now, once you come into the allocation amendment, this is going to be your workflow. So you'll see it on this kind of inside left-hand menu bar. On this page, what you're doing is you're making sure that your certifiers are appropriate. The people here are the people that can go ahead and approve. Anybody listed here can approve. So if Thomas does it, Sophia doesn't have to, so on and so forth. Okay, any questions? I can't really see anything, so if anyone does, Holly, just let me know.
There's no questions so far.
Okay, great. Okay, I think everyone's old hats at this, but we'll still go through it. Once you've completed this part, you've confirmed everyone is where they're supposed to be, you're going to click the next button, and then you're going to go to the member allocation. So this is that part where I'm going to ask you just to use your imagination. I'm going to just pop in a 5 here. We're going to just do a little pretending, just so you can kind of see that process. So this is where it says the current allocation. Ideally, we want this dollar amount to be 0. When you're in the live site, you're going to see that allocation number as far as the current allocation. And then here's where you're going to change the proposed. And then the adjustment will be reflected here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and in this case, we're going to go back down just to make the number 0. And then once you've once you have done all of your proposed allocation and you've done all of your changes, it'll have a $0. It'll have a $0 reflected. As long as you're following your schedule, you should be good. And then you go ahead and click next. This is the preview option. It gives you the opportunity to look at the current allocation, the proposed allocation. Providing there are no additional changes, you can go ahead and click the submit button. If you think, oh no, I did something wrong here, you can come back to this menu on the left-hand side, go over to the member allocation, make those adjustments here. Once you're done in this section, you will go ahead and click the submit button, and then it'll notify your members At that point, your members will go ahead and go in. They're going to approve this allocation amendment. Once all your members have approved the allocation amendment, that is when the budget and work plan will open up for each member. Each member at that point will need to go into their budget and work plan, and then they will at that point start to distribute the allocation funds. Then your consortium lead will come back and then they will certify. All right, it's really that simple. That's my full walkthrough. Is there any? Yeah.
Mandalee, can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
I believe we have already entered into Nova the $538,000 in the May revise. Is that correct, Myra?
It is. And if you're in the live site, you'll see that there. I can pop over to the live site. I just don't want to touch anything, but I can definitely do that and then show everyone so there gives everyone, just some peace of mind.
I think that would be appropriate. One thing while you're doing that, I just want to remind everybody, we're serious about if you're direct funded, you have to use the same amounts in the memo on the sheet, because some people in the past have decided, oh, I know what the COLA is, I'm going to multiply it. Because there's so many numbers, percentages, and rounding, you're never going to meet the number that we use. And so your cash will be off. And we've had this happen where they're trying to reconcile and they're wondering why they're off $10 or something. So please use our numbers. Don't try to do it yourself. Just that's a warning and a best advice for me.
Yes.
And I currently have the spinning wheel of death as I'm trying to log into Nova. So we can take this time I would also like just to kind of mention some best practices. It's not necessary, but once the members do approve the allocation amendment, and then you go into your budget and work plan. Once you finalize that, it's helpful to go ahead and notify your consortia lead. In that situation, your consortia lead can then go in and then they'll be able to certify your budget and work plan individually, because those are done as, not as a whole, as a consortia wide, it's done individually by the member. Oh, I got logged in. Another good rule of thumb when you're doing your allocations is if you are I think Myra and Neil kind of spoke to maybe you guys decide that, hey, you have a project coming up and you want to shift funds while you're doing your allocation amendment, but you're like, oh, we're just going to go ahead and do this lump sum over to, ABC. I recommend, and we recommend, doing the allocation amendment as one allocation amendment, and then any other transfer of funds, doing that in a separate allocation amendment with those journal entries. Because if for whatever reason, 5 years down the road, we have to go backwards, it's a cleaner path to understand what was done financially speaking.
And
Okay.
Mandalee, if I can,
Please.
Crystal has a question in the chat, and I think you just kind of touched on it somewhat. She said,
Okay.
we are a fiscal agent. We will do the allocation amendment for this COLA increase, and we are planning on a second allocation amendment for a one-time increase for a special project. Do we need to wait until after September 1st for the second allocation amendment? We are hoping to get both allocation amendments approved in Nova by mid-August, same time as the annual plan. And if I'm not mistaken, Mandalee, she does not have to wait. They do have to be two separate amendments, but there is no time restriction on when she can complete that one-time special project amendment, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. And if I just might add is, for special projects, yeah, you have to go through the process of doing the allocation amendment based on, nobody gets less than the prior year, so that same proportionate share. But then after you certify that allocation amendment related to the May revise, then if you have special projects or other expenses or consortia related expenses and you need to move money around, you can do that. I don't even think you can do an allocation amendment until you certify the existing one by September 1st. I think that's correct. So you're kind of stuck until you certify the May revise into Nova until you can start doing other things like with special projects or other allocation amendments.
Thank
If
you.
that answers the question. Crystal, did I answer your question?
She said
And-
thanks.
Okay, great.
Okay. So what you guys are seeing now on the screen is the live Nova, and there was something that came up in the chat. So the difference between the sandbox is it's a place where we can go on the back end for troubleshooting and helping look at people's Nova history without affecting their numbers. Typically, this access is not given to all membership. It's just a place where we can also do a live demonstration and show without affecting people's numbers, because that could be very bad.
And we being the CAPE office and CAPE
Yes,
staff, it's
thank
just a
you.
tool for us to better support you.
Mhm. So here we are. I popped back into the Ellen Hancock. It is the live site. As you can see here, there's no sandbox. It looks a little different, but still overall the same. And you can see the current allocation, and that adjustment is here in red. And then they would go all the way down. Oh, and this is they've already started. So here we go. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing screen unless there's any other place, Neil, that you think people need to see that would be appropriate.
Now,
Or Myra.
just so they could see the allocation, the May revised amount that's sitting there waiting
Yeah.
for them to program. That's all they needed to see.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And Mandali, would you be able to show us the how to access, in case someone can't find the memo or the schedule,
Yep,
a place on the website where it's located?
I have it ready to go. So if you go to the Cal Adult Ed website, say you start here on the home, you'll go ahead and go to the administrators. We'll go to funding, annual CAPE allocation, and then it's going to be under the 23-24, the final May revise memo along with the allocation schedule. All right. And I think Holly has dropped those into the chat multiple times, but we can drop it in again if people didn't have an opportunity to get it there.
I will drop it again right now.
Yeah. Any other questions? We allotted, I think, a lot of time thinking that people might have us pause. Okay.
There is a hand raised, yes.
All right, go ahead, Marilyn.
Hi, I'm concerned because I already submitted an allocation amendment last month.
Okay.
So we're not, I don't know if I was supposed to submit that allocation before this allocation, but I remember when I talked to you guys at the Casa Summer Institute, you told me I should be able to do it. So I did. So we transfer funds from one of the 3 agencies because they wanted to give up 50% of their funds. So we split those funds between the other 2 agencies.
That's appropriate. And now you will do another one with the COLA.
Correct. Marla, that allocation amendment you did was on the 22-23 funds because the 23-24 funds had not, that was done in June. So that was on last year's pot of money. And it was just kind of reallocating what would not be able to be spent so that what you did was appropriate.
No, it was for the new funds, 23-24.
So 23,
It was after we certified. It was for 23-24. It was the new funding.
Okay. Even with that, I don't foresee a problem. If a member has decided they will not spend all of their 23-24 allocation and they decided to reshare that or redistribute that with other members, that is still in play here. When you go to reallocate these funds, you're still going to distribute these new funds from the May revise according to your CFAD distribution.
Okay.
So even that member will get a portion of these funds. Now, if after the fact they choose to redistribute those, that would be a separate allocation amendment. But for this allocation amendment, you must follow the CFAD formula for distribution.
Okay, thank you. And then last question. So I think we did this like 2-3 years ago. So we're gonna be getting it. We have to request a check from that organization, correct? for those funds.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
For like I said, that allocation, those 50% funds. So we need to request a check from that organization. Like it's not gonna come to us from the state.
Correct. Correct. The state does the initial payments, and as Neil mentioned a little bit earlier, any transfer of funds amongst members you handle internally.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes.
And then just to confirm, the consortia new allocation amounts for 23-24 were entered as of July 5th of this year. So it was after the governor's budget was signed. On July 5th was when we went in and were able to enter those new 23-24 total allocations. So anything that was done prior, I don't think it should have reflected those totals. As of July 5th is when, and if you go on there now, you should be able to see those new allocation amounts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. And then Neil, you were going to answer Laura Lee's question live. Did you want me to read it out loud for you, or?
Yeah, that would be good just for the recording purposes.
Thank you. So Laura Lee says, just to confirm, as long as a consortia ensures that its members do not receive less than the prior year's funding, and the consortia members agree how the COLA is to be allocated, is it acceptable for the consortia members to agree how to allocate the new funds from the May revise?
Okay, so the way we treat COLAs, May revises, trailer bills, any kind of increase that's part of the state budget, that is part of your allocation. So when we're dealing with allocations, we have to refer to Ed Code 84914, which means even when there's an increase, everyone gets, the same proportionate share. And so what you have to do, because we're rebenching, so for this year, we're rebenching everyone's allocation base by a lot. And so if you started moving money around on COLAs, on May revises, and trailer bills, you would be affecting each member's base. And so that would go contrary to Ed Code 84914. So what you can do is you have to adhere to everyone getting the same proportionate share. But after that's done and you certify by September 1st, like Myra and Mandalee were showing you, you can go back and move money around, kind of like I was responding to Crystal. After you do the allocation amendment and you certify all your allocations for the year and you follow Ed Code and you follow our instructions, then if you have projects or you have other things you want to do, you can do an allocation amendment to move those monies around. But it would have to be agreeable. Let's say one member didn't want to move the money around. The only way you could take money away from that member is with cause. And we have those three causes for funding reduction in Ed Code 84914. So we have to be really stern on the allocations because we are rebenching the base. And there is Ed Code that says you can only reduce members' funding or change a member's funding with cause. But once you follow that, then after the fact, you can go to your bylaws and you can look at how you're, making decisions on how to move money around. And then you can follow those bylaws to do special projects, marketing, consortia-wide efforts, things like that, or maybe a new member's coming on board or something like that. Then everyone would contribute based on what your bylaws say. So hopefully that's a response you were looking for or explains it. Let me know.
She said, thank you.
All right. That was a long response.
All right, looks like Crystal has a question. Does this allocation amendment for COLA need a vote in a public meeting? We are, but I've been asked to confirm.
I think so. We've had this come up before, and Myra, you can add on to it. But when you have those original public meetings, and you're agreeing to the allocation, and it's the same proportionate share. And this is just an adjustment to that allocation, you know, a percentage increase on the COLA. It's kind of the same public meeting, but if you're not comfortable with that, you could, like you do, you're scheduling a public meeting, but it is an extension of that original meeting because you're not changing anything. You're using the same percentages. It's just a technical adjustment through the May revise that we're doing here. So I think you could go either way on that, but it's within your comfort level and maybe what your bylaws say.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Neil. I think that would be like a local control decision, how you guys go about, but as long as it falls in line with the education code and really that COLA increase is just following that same proportional distribution. But as far as the decision making, I would say that would be like that local control, whether to go back and have that meeting. But if that public meeting was already held earlier in the year while the CFAD was being determined, you can just follow that same proportional process, but we'll leave it up to that local decision.
Okay, so good questions. I would say in this format, if anyone would like to come off mute, you can ask your question or type it in the chat.
Or any other questions, right? Since we have a little extra time.
All right, why not? All right, Dr. Olinger, thank you for raising your hand. Go ahead and come off mute.
Thank you, Mandalee. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Myra. Hi, Neil. Quick question. So we were talking your outline on the enhancement, the NOVA enhancement. And Neil, you were referring that many of that enhancement or updates is really about the carryover 1491. Is there any enhancement or updates on the way that we report in NOVA about our allocations or amendments? Just kind of thinking, what other enhancements, kind of like give us a preview of what some of those, or is that in another conversation?
That's an excellent question. So we are working through those enhancements and those should be finalized at the end of July. And we will be having a webinar around that. Really the majority and the focus of those enhancements are getting NOVA ready to begin tracking the carryover functionalities within the system. And so it really will be primarily tied around looking at it from a carryover perspective now. So the majority of those enhancements are tied to tracking carryover. And even once those are released and we go through the webinar, we'll show some mock-ups. I think when you go into NOVA, you might not see that right away because it's going to take an entire year once Q4 is certified next year in September for it to actually then, show you that this consortia or this member has been flagged for carryover. There was one item that was coming to mind as I was listening to the allocation amendment process, because that is one update that we are making in relation to AB 1491. But I'm going to go back and confirm, because one of the great feedback suggestions that we got from Kate Tapp was to include a narrative box. So if there is an allocation amendment, and it sounds like because we do these on an ongoing basis, it would be helpful to have a narrative that can outline, what is the rationale for this allocation amendment. And we were really targeting that for the purposes of AB 1491. So within a year or 2 years, once the member has that excessive carryover, if an allocation, and I don't want to dive too far into that conversation, but once, if there's a point in time 2 years down the road where there's an allocation amendment taking place because of that excessive carryover, and the consortia is looking to move around funding, there will be a narrative box, a selection for conducting that allocation amendment and providing a narrative box. One of the information, or one of the items that I'm going to take back, is to confirm whether that narrative is going to be specific to, if the consortia selects that they're conducting that allocation amendment because of AB 1491. I need to confirm if they're conducting an allocation amendment for other reasons, if that narrative box will show up. But besides that, that's the only thing I can think of at the moment that will be of a change. And we will conduct a walkthrough webinar of those updates. The other one that comes to mind actually is the corrective action plan. That will be an additional update. It will be triggered by carryover as opposed to expenditure, not meeting the targeted expenditure. So I won't dive too far into that, but we will certainly have a webinar to be able to walk through those updates. We're looking at August or so. So we'll work with Cape Tap to make that announcement.
Great. Thank you, Myra. That's really helpful to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a disclaimer, we know that this first year, we're working to capture what we can, and we will continue to welcome the input and the feedback from the field as you guys are utilizing the NOVA system. Your feedback helps us improve those processes. So once we release them, we welcome the feedback so we can take that back, and whether we need to include that in the future enhancement with NOVA. So just laying that out there. If there's any feedback to provide around once we release those enhancements, we certainly welcome that from the field.
Okay, so we have some more questions. One from Kathy Walker asking if we will be providing a webinar surrounding the program area report with the enhancements of the launch board data being pre-populated in NOVA. I believe, Myra, that's something we could potentially work on.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I did see a couple emails from Cape Tap. It sounds like there's mismatch of data around the program area reporting. So we are looking into that, and we should follow back up soon. We'll work with Cape Tap to, I know we have a couple different webinars planned in August already, which is the member budget work plan. I think a consortia governance 101 at the beginning of August. So we'll look at that schedule. We'll also plan the NOVA walks, the NOVA enhancement updates around AB 1491. So we'll certainly look for dates available, and we can take that back and look to see if we need to plan another webinar around the program area reporting.
And thank you for that. Let's see the next question.
I responded to Joe.
Oh, you
Morgan,
did. Okay. All
to
right.
Kim.
And then it looks like Janine, you mentioned that the budget and work plan will open up once the amendment is certified, and the members should go in and make adjustments for their updated COLA increase. Can you go over that again? Yes. So it sounds like you understand that process. So did you want me to show that to you? Really, once you make the allocation, so once you start the allocation amendment and you submit that, your members will go in and then they'll approve. Once all members in your consortia approve, NOVA will then open up the budget and work plan for each individual member to go into. With the increase of the COLA, they will then distribute those funds in whichever object code they desire, right? So it could be like their 4,000s or their 5,000s. Say they got, $100,000 and they take 20 here, 20 there, however they distribute it, they will go ahead and go back through that budget and work plan. And then once they finish that, they will go ahead and they will then submit. Is it submitting or do they? This is Holly. This is, yeah, they go ahead and submit. Thank you for the head nod. Once they submit, we recommend that every member agency just shoots off an email to their consortia lead. At that time, the consortia lead will go into the budget and work plan and then certify.
Mandalee, how does the annual plan factor into that? Is that also connected to that process?
Just as far as the timing, it just, I don't really think it factors into the process of the budget and work plan outside of the fact that the annual plans are due right around the same time. And
I thought that you couldn't move forward on your budget and work plan unless your annual plan was submitted. Is that true? I don't know.
That,
That's ringing a bell.
that is ringing a bell.
yeah.
Yeah, I can confirm. I can follow up with Project Ops to confirm.
No, you're correct. Thank you, Neil. So your annual plan is due in Nova by August 15th. And then by September 1st, your member expense report is due and certified in Nova or approved in Nova by September 1.
Right. So what Mandalay said is still accurate. Once they submit their allocation amendment, now we just add that one extra layer of, and your annual plan is official. Nova will open up the budget and work plan because it will show additional funds unbudgeted. And that's where the members will have to go in and budget those new funds.
So what would be the most efficient process or steps to take? Do you do your allocation amendment first, then your annual plan, then your work plan and budget? What would be the most efficient sequence?
I say it really depends on each consortia and how they function. I know that we've received some emails where we have consortia leads who are planning their annual plan around this allocation schedule coming out so they can kind of get everything done in one fell swoop. So some people I think do it in parallel, and whereas others might do exactly what you laid out.
And I think that if the best, it is up to them individually. The process that would probably be more straightforward with less risk of possible complication would be to complete the annual plan first, then to do the allocation amendment so that then the budget can automatically be opened. What we don't want is to do the allocation amendment. It could cause a slight issue if Nova, since it is an automatic action, tries to open the budget and work plan that is not available yet. It may take, some work on the back end of getting that reopened once the annual plan is submitted.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other questions.
Lyric just said they thought that you needed the annual plan so the districts can check strategies in the budget and work plan. I think you covered that.
Okay. Janine?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So just for a super clarification, since we haven't submitted our annual plan yet, we haven't done any work on our budget and work plan. So when when the members open up their budget and work plan, there'll be an added amount of money that this new COLA update will then be like another added amount of money in there that they have to, it won't be lumped into their normal allocation. I guess I just want to have clarification to be able to explain that to them. I don't know if I'm being clear enough.
I think what you're saying, yeah, I think you are correct. And maybe Neil, you can help me clarify. So you get the first allocation, then you have the COLA increase. They won't see that COLA increase in their budget and work plan until you've done the allocation amendment. But those are the numbers that they will still need to work through in their budget and work plan. Is that what you're asking?
And they'll be separate than the first round of allocations? Since we haven't opened up our budget and work plan yet, because we haven't submitted our annual plan, is that sort of for people maybe who've already turned in their plan, and so their budget and work plan has already populated for them, so they've already been able to work on it? Now, once they certify these new allocations, there'll be this extra money that they have to go back into their budget and work plan to then, allocate within that, the different object codes. Is that what sort of you're talking? But for members who haven't turned in their plan yet, so they haven't even looked at their budget and work plan, will the new COLA increase just be wrapped into the allocations that are in the budget and work plan that they see for the first time after they turn in their annual plan in August.
So I believe I understand. So what you're asking is if you submit an allocation amendment tomorrow, when your annual plan is complete and the budget and work plan populates, will that allocation amendment be taken into consideration in what is displayed when your budget populates, correct?
Yeah, will it be separate than the original allocation that we have so that they have to sort of look at two different sort of funding, funding
I
numbers?
I think with that, we may have to talk to Nova and get that clarifying question answered. I know the allocation amendment is not due to be certified until September 1st, with the annual plan being due August 15th. So technically, the best action may be to do the annual plan and then do the allocation amendment so that this does not present an issue. But if you do want to do it in the reverse order, we can put a question out to the NOVA programmers and follow up with you via email.
And Myra, we would do that via you, right?
Yes, please. We can follow
Okay.
up and confirm. I think Renee provided a really good suggestion in the chat box. We suggest completing the annual plan, then the allocation amendment. At that time, the budget and work plan will open up. But yeah, we can certainly follow up with product ops.
Thank you.
And
Dr. Ollinger?
Hello. So when Renee said annual plan and then allocation amendment and then the budget and work plan, we're talking the second allocation amendment, not the May revised amendment. Is that correct? Is that what Janae was asking? I'm getting a little confused. Sorry.
I think she's talking about the May revise allocation amendment for the extra amount that was given to us by the legislature. So that would
So that's Janae's question was like, do
right.
that first or do that? And then the suggestion was do the annual plan first and then the May revised allocation amendment, and then the budget and work plan will open up and populate the correct amount. Is that right, Neil?
Right. If you look at the due dates, we have August 15th for the annual plan. We have September 1st for the allocation amendment related to the May revise. And then that would open up the budget and work plan for the members to submit.
Okay, but the September 1st deadline, isn't that the certification of the allocation amendment, not the?
Right. That's the certification of the allocation amendment for the May revise. It's also the due date for other things that I don't want to confuse things. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And
All right.
Dr. Ollinger, the difference, I think, with the certification of the allocation amendment, it's really once all members approve, it is then a certified allocation amendment. It's not like our fiscal reporting where the
Right.
members have to submit and then we wait a month for you to certify. You'll
Right.
submit it, and as soon as everybody clicks approve, it is certified.
That's right. Thank you, Holly. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Definition of certification. There's two. So I'm
Yes.
also like gonna the clarification of what what that May revise allocation amendment is versus the second amendment where they they have a special project that they had to do a second amendment. So that was helpful to me to differentiate the two. Thank you.
And I don't see any other questions.
We still got what till 1:30?
Yes.
Wow.
Hi, this is Linda. I have a very random question. You know how there were going to be some grants awarded for the medical pathways, but the consortiums were, you were going to be notified. Do you have any update about those? I heard that they were awarded, and some of my members are asking for more details. So I was wondering if you have anything that you can share with me.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we are currently getting ready to release that. We are hoping it goes out before close of business today. Fingers crossed, there's no logistical delays, but we are looking to get that release, that notification out by today, close of business today.
Oh, perfect timing. Thank you.
And Linda, not to be confused, EDD released last week a English language learner pathway grant that was awarded to, I think, six or seven adult schools and community colleges. And so it sounds like the one that Myra was talking about, but it isn't. And that was released last week. So people might be getting confused with the different pathway initiatives for adult education.
Actually, thank you for mentioning that, because when I was talking to the person that I was talking to, I was like, I think we're talking about different ones. So thank you for mentioning that.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not seeing anyone come off of mute. Myra or Neil, were there any other additional thoughts or tips or comments that you would like to share?
Oh, I think if there are no other questions, I do want to give people back their half hour to take a lunch, and just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Mandalay, Holly, Cape Tap, and Neil. And thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. Please, as always, reach out if you have any questions. I know all these dates, deadlines, and required reports can get confusing at times. So we hope we did our best to explain the information to you. And as always, please reach out to us. And thank you for joining us. I don't know, Neil, if you have anything else to add.
No, just thank you, Myra and Cape Tap. Great job today. Lot to unpack, a lot of stuff coming up. So just continue to sign up for the webinars. We'll do our best to explain things. If we can't explain it, we'll definitely follow up. So, you know the team. So look forward to the next event. And I think someone wanted us to stay on, so we can stay on, or I can stay on in case people have questions. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And then just as a reminder, Holly has dropped into the chat not only our evaluation for today's session, but we do have the CAP Summit coming up 2023. It will be our first summit in session or in person. Post-pandemic. We also have, as Myra and Neil mentioned, some upcoming webinars. So the next one is August 9th, and that's the CAP Consortium Management 101. And then on August 18th, Budget and Work Plan and Quarterly Expenditure Reports for the 23-24 year. And then just maybe put a note on the back of your brain that there may be another webinar upcoming with those enhancements that Myra alluded to. And with that, we'll go ahead and, I see Alma has her hand raised. Sorry, Alma, go ahead.
It's okay. Is it okay if I stay on after everybody leaves? I don't want to take their time.
Sure. We can go ahead and stop recording, and then we'll say goodbye to everyone.
Mandalay, when do you guys release the recording?
So great question, and thank you for asking. Once we are able to have the recording remediated, we get that out right away. Thankfully, we do have a remediated PowerPoint that also goes through the step-by-step instructions for the allocation, and that will be shared out with a reminder with the evaluations either later on today or first thing in the morning. If there are any questions, or if anyone is feeling like they just need a little hand holding, we're happy to jump on a Zoom and walk people through this process as well. Okay.